All right, perfect. Hi, Alexandra. How are you today?
Hi, Karina. It's just a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm great, thank you. Well, it's always great, to speak to experts just like you and to see more women in tech. That really makes me happy.
I'm just honored actually to be here and always happy to speak about tech. Running a startup myself, and especially with an established journalist as yourself, I'm just honored and I'm very curious to hear your questions and engage. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Wow, that's so kind of you. Well, first of all, tell us just a little bit of, of your background and, why you actually chose to establish yourself in Italy, which is
Mhm.
great. And also what really drove you to actually create a career in the tech industry.
Yeah, of course. That is. I will try to keep it short before we see a monologue of like 10 minutes happening. It tends to happen sometimes. So very easily
I
put,
know.
I've been in Italy since 8 or 9 years now. I think probably 9 years by now. And I'm Dutch myself. I've been born and raised in the Netherlands fundamentally. I studied actually law in the Netherlands and then decided to move to Italy to do my first master degree here. So I moved to Florence, lovely, culturally established city here in Tuscany, lots of art, lots of tourism going on. And I went to university here. I did my first double master's degree in international relations and European studies. So very actually world social sciences focused, much as my law degree did focus on. And then, I wrote my master thesis actually to start with. Just a couple of years ago, we're speaking about 2017, I guess. Yeah, my first master thesis about AI and how artificial intelligence intersects with, yeah, the legal world, the political world, with societies more generally. It was quite early in that regard. And I became more and more and more interested in how technology, very broadly put, interacts with society, with individuals, with economies. And yeah, from 2017 onwards, I became also more and more involved with crypto, and then later on the underlying technology, right? Blockchain. Then later on, even more and more interested in Web3. And yeah, lots of stuff happened. I did a second master's degree here in Italy, in Italian, which was quite struggling,
I
challenging, I
wanted
should
to ask
say.
about that actually. Yeah, if you did that in Italian or yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and that's regarded more politics and digital technologies. And that's really where I thought, okay, God, I really need to get into this tech sector because law, political science are great, but why not try to impact society from its very base, which is nowadays, to a great extent, technology in its broadest form. So that's kind of what happened. I started to work in Web3 actually. And then, yeah, just a couple of years later, right now, running my own startup in the tech sector, which is of course a tech solution, but also meant to spur people in Web3. So that's a very short summary, as short as possible.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And I would like to actually to hear a little bit more about the correlation in, between technology and also politics and how it's actually affecting our world.
Oh, I guess that it would very much depends what kind of lens you're taken. So what I tend to do, I don't want to make this too complex, but I really tend to think in a systemic kind of way, right? So how technological advancements impact political systems, democracies. Also, maybe more narrow, how they impact human rights, for instance. Then, especially, I looked initially a couple of years ago very much on AI in its broadest form. We're speaking so much today about AI, right? But often we don't even define it. So when I mean AI, I don't mean let's say one specific um, application of AI, such as a certain language system or a certain application in a smart camera. I mean more AI generally and how it can impact society. And what I really observed during my research is what I'm most nervous about is how it can impact inequality within societies from a monetary perspective. And then, furthermore, as kind of like secondary effects, how it can potentially disrupt political systems. Um, that is just one of the pathways, actually, that as a systemic kind of thinker, that worries me. Another type of example can be autonomous or semi-autonomous decision-making systems, as we already seen them for a couple of years now being employed in governmental kind of bodies. And I'm sure that you're well aware that there's examples, for instance, in the Netherlands, where decision-making systems run to a certain extent very untransparent within government bodies. So, for instance, in public welfare type of systems or fraud detection systems are actually, not working in a fair and transparent manner, with a lot of real world impacts for individuals, and discrimination and the amplification of existing biases that we already see in technology. So we see, I think a lot of impacts, of course, also good ones, right? Of course, AI and other types of technologies, as I'm sure you're knowing as a tech journalist, can be used to increase productivity, to find new solutions for existing problems, to even find new solutions to problems that we're not even aware of. But generally, I think this is such a broad discourse, actually, that we can probably speak a lot about.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I really love that. But what are a couple of case scenarios in particular where technology can really, come to our help? And what are some cases where technology can be really disruptive, in your opinion, or based on, let's say, on your research or the research that you're doing at your company?
Oh, that is okay. So in terms, that's a lovely question. Thank you for asking that. I think if we just start with the latter, if we consider what I am doing with my company, so fundamentally what we've done with our company, it's nothing that groundbreaking, to be honest with you. I think we should be honest and very clear about that. What we've done is we've created a free and open access business app. It's as simple as that for everyone who is professionally involved in the Web3 space. But if you look underneath that, you can almost consider it a little bit as kind of like a Tinder, but then for professionals in the Web3 space, whether you're an investor, maybe you are, running a project, maybe you are on the marketing side of, a Web3 company, whatever it really is that brings you involved with Web3. But if we look underneath that, actually, I think generally what we really aim to do here is to help individuals in the Web3 space. I think if we look at what's currently happening within Web3, I really see this paradigm shift of how Web3 can improve societies, not only on the financial aspect, right? We always speak about financial inclusion, but also in terms of offering, new models for data sharing, more agency in terms of how we are moving on the web, and indeed how we are interacting with financial institutions. That is way less, actually, more peer-to-peer. And what I really want to do with our app is actually help those professionals that are way more clever than that I am, making sure that they can do business with each other a lot faster, a lot more fair. And what I meant with, if we look underneath the surface, it's a little bit more complex, is that I guess that in general, if we consider tech, of course, technology is built by humans, right? That is nothing weird to say. Of course, now more and more we see also AI coming in and helping humans. And that is actually, to go back to the first part of your question, probably one of the parts that is mostly disruptive and going to be more and more disruptive. Indeed, AI helping humans. There's nothing new here that I'm telling you. But what I see is that, especially in Web3, business is still being conducted by humans. And again, even our human biases are coming in. And even nowadays, if you look at Web3 and technology, right, the companies that are going to make it, yes or not, do they manage to connect with investors? Do they manage to raise? And here I've observed an unfair level playing field, basically, in how we're doing business, in the sense that in Web3, yes, it's great, it's transparent, it's open, it's fair chances for everyone. But if you want to do business in Web3, based upon where I'm coming from, what I've observed is that it very much depends where you're living, if you know the right people, and if you manage to speak the right business language. And that is actually a little bit unfair. And a lot of opportunity remains on the table due to this very fact. Hence, the idea of Thrilled, enabling everyone in the Web3 space to connect with one another in a more fair kind of and streamlined kind of way. And this is a very long monologue, but I think that a lot of things are coming together in terms of how technology can help society, including Web3, including AI, but also how it risks to amplify the current biases and inequalities that we see in society, because you have to be native in the Web3 or in the AI language, right? You have to be a good talker, you have to be a good connector, you need to be able to use that digital technology and have that laptop. And that is not for everyone globally. So that is actually a risk that I see with tech, that it can enlarge that gap, very simply put. End of monologue.
Welcome to Sci-Tech Swiss, the fastest growing world-class podcast of all times. We're kicking off the new year with a sponsorship drive during the WIFE week in Davos with an exciting ad campaign with Ringier. Karina, over to you and tell our audience how they can hitch their wagon to our star.
Become a sponsor for the next episode or we produce one for you in our professional studio. Find us on premierswissmedia.com. I love that one. No, actually, I really love that. And no, don't worry, I will still be here. So it's not going to be a monologue. It's like a conversation, a friendly conversation about, having more inclusion also in the Web3 space. And that's also what I see a lot, and also a lot of women in the Web3 space, which really makes me happy. But also another question, another curiosity that I have is, how are you guys handling different case scenarios, or, what are certain challenges, for instance, because having a startup and also dealing with a lot of competitors doing, much similar work, I think that you have to create a business that's really unique, and especially being unique nowadays when, there's a lot of competition. Everyone wants to create a business in a Web3 space, wants to establish themselves as being, the experts in the field. And how are you guys handling, all these, narrow road, I would say?
Yeah, that is a lovely question. I think there is generally quite a tension going on between globalization and technology, being able to connect everyone, being able to make everyone and everything visible. Because on the one hand side, yes, there's opportunity everywhere that you can establish your own business, you can join that new company, you can make yourself visible as an expert or influencer. I don't see myself, by the way, as an expert. I need to be quite honest about that. I see myself more as a generalist who is curious and maybe a bit proactive, but not necessarily as an expert on any type of field. But yeah, maybe Web3 to an extent, but still I'm not a coder. Having said that, there is this tension between the openness of tech and globalization versus having that unique solution as a company, especially in terms of competition, right? And especially also where Web3 projects themselves are concerned. It's great to build something new, but if that is immediately open source, everyone can go ahead with it, right? And establish their own project or copy it. I do think that we need to be honest here, is that our platform itself, for now, it's like Web 2.5. So it's very much focused on the Web3 space, but the tech stack itself is still Web 2. And yes, anyone can basically copy the idea. Having said that, I do think that to succeed as a company and as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you've heard this before and everyone can kind of grasp it, you need more than just this idea or even that product. Once you've built it, you need the right team, you need to have the determination, you need to be able to find the right investors if you at least cannot bootstrap it. You need to create the right connections, especially if you're a networking kind of app, a business app. So there are so many parameters actually that can or cannot establish one's success. Having said that, I do think that most of what is happening in Web3, everyone is currently very focusing on those innovative solutions and maybe are forgetting a little bit about this kind of like underlying systemic kind of things that we need as well. That's why I said in the beginning that as a systemic thinker, I really like to think myself, but also our business solution as kind of a systemic solution, right? We have this threshold in place, everyone can use it to connect better, to talk with each other, more fair, more streamlined, and that's it, right? That is our role. It's quite limited, but it's basic. That's at least our very ambition. So yeah, I don't know if that answers substantially and sufficiently.
I actually love your answer. I love when people are very honest, about their capabilities and, their abilities. And I think that actually someone told me that, many times, a way to succeed in, the tech field is actually to become a great speaker, because you have to be able to communicate, to fully communicate, your message, your ideas, and essentially your work to other people, and also the ability to translate this complexity of technology, because technology is very complex. But now moving on the regulatory side, what do you think that there are still things to be adjusted there? Still staying maybe on the Web3 space, or maybe on later on we can even talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, in terms of, that's a lovely question again, because not only for me, myself as a company, but of course all the companies that we're dealing with and all the solutions that are going to be invented today and tomorrow. I kind of like see this split in the Web3 space. There is people that really, and companies that really want to remain compliant, that maybe are interacting with traditional finance, that maybe are wanting to interact with traditional brands, whether there be type of platforms or very narrow applications. And of course there is the real Web3 disruptors that really prefer to incorporate themselves maybe on the British Virgin Islands and stay as far away as possible from any jurisdiction that is kind of like trying to limit their involvement, and they're very acting in the Web3 space. Having said that, of course, even if you are somewhere in this jurisdiction where we see very little regulations in place, of course, if you want to be active in a certain market, especially when you're moving kind of off-chain, so in the real world, of course, you will have to live up to the jurisdictions that are applicable where your consumers are. So I do see a little bit of a tension there. More specifically, of course, to an extent, if you look worldwide, we see this kind of blanket of different types of regulations. I mean, we don't even have standard definitions of what is a digital asset, what is blockchain per se, what is Web3 per se. I recently have written an academic chapter that looked again very systemically, Herbert's systemic approaches to the Web3 space, right? And I did a lot of comparative literature research into blockchain and Web3, how it's being defined. And again, very much like AI a couple of years ago, no standard definition. So how can legal systems even have this kind of standardized approach if you would argue that that is needed? And of course, if you look at all the different jurisdictions out there, even within Europe to an extent, there where the EU doesn't have regulatory power, all the approaches are different. What type of tokenization models are possible? How are taxes being, how are tax services looking at crypto assets? There are so many different approaches there, and it's sometimes not even clear, like stuff is lacking. You call the tax service in the Netherlands and it's like, we don't know. And that's not even for crypto per se. This is also for me establishing my business. I'm based in Italy, but my company is registered in the Netherlands. And already right there, it was like a mess to figure out, quite frankly, how that would all work with taxes. Everyone had different opinions and ideas, right? So the fact that, yes, again, we're speaking here about the global phenomenon, but with very different national kind of approaches, it's just generally, I guess, if you're in favor of regulation and of a uniform kind of approach, that is kind of challenging, I would say. Having said that, I think, does that answer your question to an extent?
Well, to an extent, actually, it's also a broad question, a broad answer, but I totally agree with that, because I actually feel the same when it comes to the tokenization process, also to the digital aspect, that certain regulations need to be reviewed and need to be renewed, actually. So honestly, even before establishing a certain business, you always have to double check. And also, especially if you're based in Italy, but your business is there in the Netherlands, then it might be just a little bit more, the situation might be, especially in this case, more complex. And, it's all question about details. As I'm not a lawyer, obviously, I can't really comment on that, but from a journalist.
No, me neither, probably. Yeah, I think that completely makes sense. And that made me realize that actually it's not only necessarily the immediate national regulations, but it's also what are the criteria that banks, for instance, I also had really big problems opening a bank account in the Netherlands, whilst my company was Dutch, just because we kind of indirectly served the Web3 market. And the banks, they were not happy about that. So I got rejected a couple of times, which in my opinion was quite ridiculous, because again, it showcases the power of banks. maybe another very quick example here, not to go too much into detail, but my mother wanted to open a trading account the other day because she was excited about crypto, and we thought, okay, let's start at a centralized exchange. So she was trying to interact. Boom, transactions being blocked by the bank unilaterally.
No way.
Because because they didn't recognize, or they thought it was suspicious, the trading platform. So they just blocked her credit card like 3, 4, 5 times, days in a row. And that again, it really showcases the power of banks. Like, they can really interfere with your business, like literally, or even prevent a small startup to actually move on and get those investor funds. For me, not being able to open a bank account, it caused a lot of delay earlier this year. This is like a real world example of how these things are going. I'm sure a lot of people know that too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And what are certain tools, or maybe, I don't know, certain aspects that still to be reviewed? And how are you on this mission actually with your company, helping other people solve these kind of issues? Maybe what are certain aspects where you feel that, hey, this regulation in particular needs to be reviewed? Or what exactly, how are you guys trying to motivate more people to actually open their startups? What are certain things that they need to take into consideration maybe before starting their businesses, especially
that is very nice. I mean, I guess it's maybe important to say that at Thrilled, we kind of try to help everyone who is professionally involved. So not only startups and people working for startups, but maybe also any type of service provider. So from a marketing company focused on Web3 to a freelance lawyer to perhaps someone on the other side of the planet who is looking for an internship in this space, all the way to professional VCs and angel investors who are focused on Web3. So just by providing the platform, we enable them to connect better, which I guess, because fundamentally it really works like that you say who you are, what kind of your business needs are. So maybe you're looking for investments, maybe you're looking to invest, maybe you're looking for partnerships, maybe you're looking for a job. It very much depends on who you are and what you need. And that is kind of the suggestions that are provided to you free and open access again on our platform. But I guess that we also have a specific part of the app, and I don't want to, like, let's say, make everyone fall asleep, where we put our partners. So when I come across great companies actually in the space that I think are very much of interest to our community, whether they be startups or maybe banks or maybe marketing companies that are great, I don't know, I try to kind of like give them a little bit of extra visibility on our partner portal by officially partnering up with them. So recently I founded a massive, super cool London-based neobank that is really open to crypto companies, right? So then I want to partner with them so that everyone can find this solution out there. That is something really, really small that we're doing. Maybe in general, I would really perhaps suggest everyone who's considering starting a startup to maybe think very well about potential barriers or challenges that you can face, not only with regards to your project, but also already before, especially if you want to remain compliant and you're in a specific jurisdiction. But that is just some very, very general advice. Perhaps I could here only say go to a real expert, let's say a lawyer who's very specialized in corporate law in your, in your country.
No, I like that. That's actually very useful. And I would also personally take that into consideration, especially if I wanted to have my own startup. Also, last question that I'm actually asking everyone, and that's a very interesting question, and I really had interesting answers, is do you think that overall technology should be perceived as our friend or our enemy? And why is that so?
Isn't it not true that probably everyone says technology is neutral, it depends on how you use it? Is that a common answer?
Yeah, that's a very common answer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I would probably argue that just because I'm very much, in favor of the human agency. It all depends on what we do fundamentally. Of course, it's not that we can necessarily impact everything, but to a great extent, I'm very much in favor of this kind of technology is neutral and it can be used however you wish to use it. Having said that, the story is of course a bit more complicated. What I think is extremely interesting and we haven't even spoken so much about AI, but where AI itself is actually more and more involved with coding. And to which extent, maybe in the near future, they do that autonomous or almost semi-autonomous, because there we will actually have the AI writing the codes of other technological applications. And then you can have a very even more interesting debate to which extent technology is really neutral, or maybe it derives from a prior neutral kind of aspect, because even though technology can be used by a human in a good or a bad way, or by a company in a good or in a bad way, if you have certain biases in the code, it can still be, by its nature, slightly more bad or slightly more good, right? There's always space for values in technology, even though, of course, again, also here it depends to which extent those values can be really coded, yes or not. Usually you only have yes or no's. This is maybe a bit too complex for a short podcast and very philosophical, but I think that this debate is extremely interesting, actually. And I guess that you can always look at certain philosophers of law, even such as Hart, who has really written a lot about whether law can be neutral, yes or no, and which type of actors are impacting legal development. So what I like to do is actually look at other types of disciplines and kind of like apply that to technology. But yeah, generally, good or bad, I think it's neutral.
Another answer that I got many times is actually that it's a frenemy. It's a little bit on both sides. You know, you can't really say that it's a friend or an enemy, but in most case scenarios, it can be both. So that's the most common answer. And I totally agree with you. It's a long debate, a way long debate on that. And also about the coding stuff. Yeah, definitely. Maybe we need a second part for that. But I actually really enjoyed your work and also your answers. And I totally agree with, you know, pretty much on everything that you're saying. And I think that people need to be more careful on the regulatory side, especially on the regulatory side when they are starting a business.
Yeah, and I think maybe as a last thing to say, I do think that the regulators and the regulators and the policymakers should actually even also be careful. It's great to say, okay, we have to really mitigate the adverse effects of technology, but do, of course, always regard the opportunity that we have on the table as well, especially if we can agree upon the fact that technology is legal. Yes, it's important to be aware, to think about the precautionary principle, but we don't want to mitigate people's chances. And I mean, we here in the West, especially here in Europe, we're in a very luxurious position. And I think we should really not underestimate what technology can do in other parts of the world, especially if we consider crypto, universal basic income, the more fair sharing of data. There are so many things that will have maybe for us a marginal impact on our welfare situation, but in other parts of the world, it won't. So in that regard, I would say to regulators, yes, it's great to be cautious, but don't be overly cautious, please, and understand what you're regulating, because that is also a big problem that I see. People speaking about technology, but not ever having built anything, not ever properly having interacted with anything. So that is something, just a final rant from my side.
Exactly. No, that's right. I totally agree with that. Yeah, they should review more the impact and also the regulatory side. They really need to pay attention here, and also the policymakers. That's true. So with that all said, thank you so much for taking your time to speak with us. It was absolutely lovely, and we'll love to speak to you about again to probably have another debate on that, on AI specifically. So again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for your lovely questions.